I read a book a while back called How to Make Your Own Luck, and as fanciful as that sounds, there's an element of truth to it. Obviously you can't change what other people are doing, but you can change what you're doing, and a lot of what we call luck is actually due to seizing opportunities and or damned hard work, so you might say that somebody got lucky, they struck it big in the music industry, or someone got unlucky and fell off a bridge. Now both of those things really can be attributed to actions. So in other words, somebody works damned hard, they do all the right things in order to make themselves a success in the music industry. Or in the case of the person who plunged off a bridge, they climbed the guardrail and didn't take notice of the safety signs and, I don't know, thought they'd be clever and not hold onto the rail, and away they went. So it's difficult when you talk about things like having bad luck, because then you have to ask yourself, how much of that is in fact due to something that you did? So let's talk about that a little. So I switched sides so that you can see the beautiful view that I was enjoying, and I just have my back to it at the moment, but you get to enjoy it at the very least. Now, I was talking about luck, but I'll get to that in just a moment, because I wanted to give you a bit of an update about how things have been going, and they haven't been going all that well. I think a video I made recently, I was talking about a neuromuscular disorder I have, and the ongoing struggles with trying to get the management of the drugs correct, and breathlessness, which I thought was due to the fact that we hadn't actually got those drugs correct. But I continued to see the neurologist who was also an immunologist about it, and he determined that maybe there was something else going on, which is a fair premise. So he sent me off to have a couple of tests. One was what they call an echocardiogram stress test, which involves having an echocardiogram, then being stressed, so walking on a treadmill with an ever-increasing slope to increase your respiratory and blood rate, and then a second echocardiogram to see just the difference between the two, so the baseline and then the stressed version. And then the second test was what's called a spirometric or something like that, I think, which is really just a lung capacity or ability test. You can Google these yourself and see what they mean. Now, in the first one, the heart test, I haven't actually got the result yet, but I did do one of these a couple of years back and was able to walk on the treadmill for about 9 minutes. This time around, they actually stopped me at 6. So it suggests to me that there was something in the ECG which was of concern to them. So either it was also the fact that I was breathless, but also maybe there was something going on with the heart rate that bothered them, so they stopped me early. And then the second one, and I haven't seen the result of that, as I said, but the second one was the lung test, and it was determined, in fact, that I do have what's called COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So, in other words, some kind of restriction on the ability to inhale oxygen, and at the same time, some lung damage, no doubt due to a bunch of things, including when I was very young, I smoked, environmental factors and or genetics and age, so a combination of factors. Now, if we get back to what I was talking about at the start, about luck, you say, well, that's bad luck, and it is, there's not a lot that I could have done about that, because a lot of those factors that have led me to this point were so long ago there was no possible way of predicting what may happen in the future. Certainly, maybe if I hadn't smoked when I was a teenager, but you know, that's now 60, well, nearly 60 years ago. And I don't think we had the same kind of knowledge about it then. It was actually considered cool and grown up to smoke. And then the other, I suppose, is there's not a lot you can do about the choice of genetics. You're kind of stuck with the parents that you have, and so on, you know. So there's not a heap that you can do about that. But coupled with all of those things, which are in themselves, you know, enough to make you feel rather gloomy about yourself, there's been a whole bunch of other stuff. And, you know, one of those is, and I showed you a picture of Milly, the dog, 2 or 3 months back, and she had bandages on both legs. Now, that still has not resolved itself. So that issue started with a tear on the right Achilles tendon. And it was repaired, and it had torn at the muscle end, so it was reattached at the muscle. And then her leg was put into a splint. Because she transferred her weight to her left leg, then she started to stress that, and it started to sag as well. So, as you saw in that photograph, she had both legs bandaged and splints on both legs. Now, as time went by, naturally we couldn't continue to have a bandage in with splints the whole time, so we got these leg, I suppose, supports. They're called tarsal supports, and I'll show you a picture of those. And so we removed all of the dressings and fitted those, and they actually were not nearly enough to support her weight, and she ended up collapsing pretty well flat-footed on both legs again. So in other words, the left leg failed completely, as in the tendon, which had not been repaired, but it failed, and then also the repair failed, so she ended up walking flat-footed on both legs and has had to then go back into hospital and get a screw inserted in her ankles that go through into the shin bone. Now, first of all, this one of these was put in and it snapped, believe it or not, and so that failed, and then that was replaced with a second screw, and it's now pulled out of the bone, which meant that she basically had the sharp end of a screw waving about inside her leg, poor love. Now, yesterday she had an operation on her left leg, and they've now put in a bolt with a nut on the end that goes from the ankle through into the shin bone, with a nut on the end to hold it in place. So theoretically that should hold it quite rigid. But the concern then is, if you make a hole in the bone big enough to take a bolt with a nut on the end, do you then weaken the bone? And do you then have problems if anything's going to break? It's no longer the screw or the bolt because there's a nut on the end of it, but the bone itself. So it's been a huge cause of concern, and it's also meant that I've spent a lot of time carrying her around so that she's not stressing those tendons, muscles, and or, you know, screws and bolts and whatever else, you know. So that in itself has been a huge job, and constant care also to make sure that she doesn't run or jump, so she's basically confined to the house. So that's certainly been an issue. On top of that, we've had a couple of weeks of very heavy rain, and you know what it's like here in Queensland. You know, when it rains, it just rains and it saturates the ground, and the ground around my place gets very muddy and jelly-like. And I went out to see if I could clear some more of those stumps after the trees had fallen in the December storms of last year, and got the ute bogged. So now I've got a ute parked in the front yard as a reminder that I had some bad luck, which in my case, wasn't really bad luck. It was just not giving it enough thought, instead of just thinking, I'll be right, it's a four-wheel drive, I'm fine. But, as you know, when you sink a vehicle up to its axles, it doesn't really matter how many wheels are turning. If they're just turning and not going anywhere, well, then you can spin all four wheels and still be stuck. So that's probably the kind of state of play. And all of that, as you know, has an impact on mood and emotions until you kind of get to the point where you just don't, well, I suppose it's, you don't want anything else to happen, so as a result, you don't do anything in case something else does happen. So, it all becomes a fairly depressive cycle. So that's the update. And I didn't want it all to be entirely doom and gloom, because one of the things that I did want to talk about was that I got myself a new camera. Let me just grab that. Now this is it here, and it's a DJI Pocket 3, which is a remarkable little camera, and obviously I'm not using it to film this, even though that's entirely possible because it's completely self-contained. It has this wonderful little carry case that it stays in, and when you flick it on, all you have to do is rotate this screen, and that actually activates the camera itself. And now, as you can see, I'm shooting back towards the camera, and once I hit record, it starts recording. So it's recording what it is that I can see looking back at the camera. But when I rotate it like this, and I'll show you this footage, it doesn't sharply jerk because it's got its own built-in gimbal. It rotates slowly, and it has, to a degree, a kind of a horizon fix, I guess, is probably the best way of describing it. So even though I might tilt it like so, the image itself stays level in relation to the horizon. It also has a selfie function, so that if I hit this little button here like that, it flicks around and it'll point at me like so. So I'm now filming with this Pocket 3. It also shoots in portrait, so if I flick this here into the portrait mode, it will film now in portrait, and if I'm not videoing at the time when I do this, that actually also turns the camera off. So it's really kind of incredibly intelligent in that you don't have to push a bunch of buttons. It kind of does it all itself. Here we go. Now this is how it turns itself off. And parks the gimbal. So it goes back in its case. Now the other thing about it is it also records sound direct to the device, but it also has a clip-on microphone as well, like this one here, that will then give you a better quality recording if you're not near the camera. So this is a remarkable little camera. That's about it for this feed, and I'll get this one up, and I've got a bunch of other stuff which I'd recorded, for example about that new camera, about fitting new gas lifts to the Volvo and so on, so a few things like that, but I'm not sure they're ever going to get made. I was just in such a state that I wasn't really in the mood, to be honest. But I pick up Milly this afternoon at 4, and she's now had an operation on both legs, She's now got those screws in both legs to keep them rigid. So let's hope that we've finally got the poor love fixed. Thanks for watching.